Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. Today we've got an awesome build with the Dragon King's Cragblade, focusing on its incredibly fun Ash of War. Before we continue though, a quick shout out to ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is the VPN I use and trust, as it can keep your browsing safer and more private. There's a discount link and 3 extra months free in the description below. First up here is Radahn, whom admittedly took me around 4 tries. The Cragblade takes a lot to get used to, as its Ash Thundercloud form has a long animation and you can change the direction on it. Throughout this video, we'll be focusing on adding damage to the Ash of War, as it's the most enjoyable part of this weapon. The Cragblade itself is good for posture damage and solid thrusting weapon in general, however the Ash is where you'll get the majority of your lightning damage, and for me is the best part of it. And you're going to see on Radahn here that the Ash of War, as I mentioned, it's something that you are going to have to get used to. Now, as far as free aiming it and then target locking, it really has its advantages and disadvantages that we're going to talk about later in the video on which you choose to do. Now, for Radahn, he's going to take good damage from this, and as you can see, moving it around, sometimes with this weapon you will outright miss, but other times when you land it, you can hit through for a lot of damage and then do the slam down for even more damage at the end. And it's something where when you use the Ash in its entirety, we're going to talk about this later in the video too, you're going to build up posture damage too, as each tick does a little bit of posture damage and the slam down does a bunch too, so you can get posture breaks on different bosses, especially if you hit them with all of the Ash of War Thundercloud form. Now, we're going to show off the Bolt of Gransax later in this video too, because they have similar stats and you can actually switch between the two, but the slight difference here is you have a little bit of physical damage in the Ash of War, although most of it is lightning damage. I also decided to start with Radahn here because Radahn's a nice opponent to take on because he's a larger target, and I figured I'd be able to hit him with a lot of the Ash of War and it'd be a good opportunity to test it on. Even with that said though, even with having a larger target to use the Ash of War on, it still felt at times a little bit difficult to aim this. This is something, and you're going to hear me say this throughout the video, that it does take practice. You're going to have to practice this one if you want to land it well and get the most damage out of the Ash of War. Now we're going into a new journey, Journey 17. This is New Game Plus 7 like always, and all the bosses are a bit tanky. The Cragblade's Ash of War does good damage, which I'll show off a lot in this video, as you already probably know, but we'll also be showing off the Bolt of Gransax later on and how they have identical stats and the advantage of switching between both, and basically a setup that can universally work for both of these awesome weapons. Now, going into the new journey, Margit obviously isn't going to be too much of a challenge, but it does take a minute to get used to the direction for the Ash of War. If you're target locked, I think I mentioned this, you can outright miss at times, and if you free aim the Ash of War, you have to continue direction and continue to move to the target. But if your target or the boss is moving a lot, around a lot in general, it becomes difficult to land even if you're free aiming the Ash of War, which is a slight disadvantage to this weapon. To be honest, it'd be nice if this weapon art had a buff for PvE. I'm not sure of how good it is in PvP. I know people use it a lot as a thrusting sword, but as far as the Ash of War itself goes, yeah, it could use a little bit of a buff for PvE in terms of how much damage it does through the entire Ash. That being said, it's still good damage, but even with a good amount of buffs and the right stats for it, it still feels like it lacks at times, more on the fun side and less on the overpowered side for this type of weapon, that's for sure. Definitely really enjoyable to land. Now we're moving on to Godrick, who's never too challenging. I ended up using him and Margit to practice with the weapon a bit. The weapon's lightning damage is going to scale purely off of Dexterity, and the Ash can be buffed generically by Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri for an additional 40%. Now, about the posture damage for the Cragblade, as far as the Ash of War goes, it does around 6 or 7 posture damage per second throughout it, and then slams down for somewhere in between around 20 or 30 additional posture damage. This is something that can easily add up for a fairly decent amount, and you can end up getting posture breaks with the weapon art. If you're able to hit them through it, like I am here, you're going to end up seeing a posture break on Godrick here, and we're able to take advantage of that with a critical hit. Yeah, it's something that's going to work on bigger bosses more because, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to hit them through it fairly often. But again, you're going to get that in general if you spam or use the weapon art a lot, and you're going to build that up fairly quickly. You can probably break a lot of the bosses in the game using the Cragblade in that sense. And keep in mind your heavy attacks, your heavy charged attacks with the thrusting sword itself, the Cragblade, will also add up to a good amount of posture damage too. So it's a good option to get those breaks in. That's something that you can definitely get out of the weapon art on top of the awesome lightning damage that you can get and the physical damage from the weapon itself. Now the dragon in the lakes here was a little tough because this was the first time I was figuring out whether I wanted to free aim the ash more or go with target lock. They both have advantages and disadvantages, but for me I think, and I ended up coming to this conclusion, that target locking is better for bigger enemies. It works well for those situations, and free aiming seems to be better for the small bosses and enemies. Now keep in mind, as you're going to see this here with the dragons, because of their legs, they have relatively small hitboxes there. They're a little bit harder to hit, but assume, generally speaking, the bigger the boss, the easier it is to land this Ash of War and take advantage of both the posture damage it builds up in general, the lightning damage, and the additional slam down at the end. Hopefully that helps explain it a little bit further. If you haven't experimented yet with the Dragon King's Cragblade, it's something that you're just going to have to practice on some of the bosses. There's different bosses and enemies that you can practice on too. You have that area in Caelid with all the mini dragons. That's a great place to practice the Ash on. But overall, it's going to take a little bit to get used to, but with the build and setup we have here, you're going to get solid damage out of it. And ultimately, I ended up liking this weapon a lot. I found it was a really good time. The Ash of War is something that takes a little bit of skill to land, and it's something that if you're going to try this weapon out and you're looking to make a dexterity-based lightning build between this and the Bolt of Gransax, it's a good combination. Now, the Magma Wyrm here ended up being a perfect example of both the aiming and the posture breaking ability of the Cragblade. This ended up being the perfect clip to show off the Ash and all of its capabilities. And this is when I realized that when I was landing it, it felt really good to land it, and I thought, wow, this is a really awesome Ash of War in Thundercloud form, but at the same time, I realized that I often found myself missing too, even when free aiming or when target locking, both of which I would end up missing from time to time, which is a little bit of a disadvantage. And we were able to break the Magma Wyrm too, which wasn't too difficult, so he ended up getting broken there. We were able to get the critical hit in, and then we finished him off with the Ash of War, like we've been doing a lot with these bosses. These are mostly early and mid-game bosses, but even so, this weapon turned out to be pretty good. Not overpowered, but a solid weapon. NPC Invaders aren't much trouble with this, as you can literally use the Ash of War or thrusting attacks to beat them easily. Thundercloud form works fine, and the slam down can knock down low poise enemies, giving you time to charge up another attack. Much like the Bolt of Gransax, the Cragblade is also chargeable, I mentioned this earlier, for even more damage. So feel free to beat up some NPC invaders with this. You're not going to have too much of a hard time because they have a hard time avoiding it. You're going to hit them consistently and then you're going to end up knocking them down, and you can easily finish them off with the thrusting attacks if need be. For mobs, it's easy to use, and Gatefront is a great place to practice on them. Practice fully charging the Ash while also combining some of the slower thrusting attacks it has, and you'll get used to it in no time. By the way, if you're following this point and haven't subbed, be sure to hit that sub button for more awesome Elden Ring content. And the damage on the jump attacks isn't too bad. That's something that you can use, although it has a little bit of a short range the way the jump attack works, and then the charge attacks, you're going to be able to get a lot of damage from those too. But for me, I'm going to use the Ash of War a lot. It's the best part of it. It's really fun to use. It's cool looking. It's something that can do a lot of damage. Does have a decent damage cap, though again, not overpowered, just really fun to use. By the way, speaking of fun, my top 10 fun builds are coming out soon. That one took a little longer, so I ended up posting this one first. So if you're looking forward to that one will be out in no time. It should actually be out the day after this one if everything goes as planned, and I'm really looking forward to that one. That was a really cool video to do. Now on to the Bolt of Gransax, which has similar scaling as both weapon arts are chargeable, do mainly lightning damage, and scale with dexterity. It's actually pure lightning damage on the Bolt of Gransax. You can use the identical build I came up with here to run either weapon. They do not have a combo move set as they are different weapon classes, but you can easily switch, one for long range and one for battle close. The Bolt has the range while the Cragblade has more power up close and can do the posture damage for you if you're looking to do that. These are great to use both for different situations. Now, as far as dragons themselves, other than the ones that are in Farum Azula that have the lightning on them, the kind of obvious ones, the majority of dragons in the game will take additional lightning damage, making both of these weapons solid options against dragons. By the way, for those that don't know, you can get the Bolt of Gransax in the capital. It's on the giant spear in the middle of the capital, and you cannot get it once it turns to Ashen Capital, so keep that in mind. Once it's Ashen Capital, you can't get the Bolt of Gransax. You have to get it before the end of Farum Azula. By the way, the last poll I did too, as far as that goes, I'm going to be doing all 4 of those videos. We have this one, we have the top 10 fun builds, and then we're going to do my top 10 applicable Ashes of War, ones that you can put on weapons, and we're going to do the 5 fan builds too, and I can't wait. Now for buffs. First things first, we're going to drink our tier, which has the lightning tier and the faith tier in it, so we can do our buffs. Then we're going to use Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri. That'll give us additional 40% damage, then fill up our FP. Then we get to use the really cool Ash of War and Thundercloud form, which you can free aim, you can target lock, you can use it how you choose, and you'll end up having a good time with this one. This is definitely one to check out. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Dragon King's Cragblade plus 10, Bolt of Gransax preferably plus 10. We had a weightless seal. We have a random set of armor on. We hit 51 poise for this build. We have the Lightning Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Ritual Shield's Talisman to negate some of the damage you can take with Thundercloud form. When you're in the air, you're a little bit vulnerable, but you can use the Ritual Sword's Talisman for more damage. Shard of Alexander, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Faith tier. Let's get into stats. Now for stats, this is Dexterity focused, and if you don't need those points in Arcane, that was from my starting class, you won't need them for this build. You can put those 5 points back in and get to 70 Dexterity, and then between 70 and 80, I'd rather have the buffs. Those 10 levels aren't going to make up for the 40% additional damage we're going to get for Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri. Thanks for watching this one, as it was another fun one to do. I can't wait to do more builds and continue to grow the channel. It has been a wild journey to this point, and I'm really looking forward to DLC and the future of this community. Be sure to sub, and I'll catch everyone at my channel. Have a great day.